When we sit down, it's time for the conversation, and this is Meet the Press edition, the Pan-African edition, where we sit down with journalists from across Africa to put into context the impact of COVID-19 across this continent. Joining us today for this conversation is Arnold Kwizera. He is the head of content at CNBC Africa. He is he's previously served as Managing Director, Urban Communication Limited. He was formerly the COO, Kigali Communication Associates. He was previously a TV and radio host at Royal FM Kigali, and he studied at University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, South Africa. Our next guest is Odelia Ofori Ntiamoa. She is the head of business programming at the Multimedia Group Ghana. She is a news anchor and an investigative reporter who's previously worked with TV3 Network in Ghana. She is also an international correspondent, African News from 2016. She is part of the 2019 Bloomberg Financial Journalism Fellows. She also has been a Dushuwele alumni in documentary filmmaking training. She won the Ghana Journalist Award Development Journalist of the Year 2020, Television Feature of the Year 2012, and the Ministry of Environment Ministers Award in Environmental Reporting 2010. And also, Odelia holds a master's in oil and gas communication from the University of Cape Coast and a degree in geography from the University of Ghana. Our third guest is Audrey Naidu. He's a senior writer at the Sunday Independent South Africa, worked for a number of publications in print and broadcast with ETV, Sunrise, and contributing to radio stations. He's also managing PR for National Geographic's, contributed to Opus, a book on Nelson Mandela, was a special correspondent for Bloomberg, BNA, and he has been to Oxford and the US on journalism fellowships. He also sits as a commissioner on the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for making time. Arnold, let's begin closer home in Rwanda. Rwanda has been touted as one of those countries that has been able to successfully mitigate the spread of COVID-19 and manage its cases. What are some of the factors that could be attributed to this success rate in Rwanda?
Yeah, I think the answer to that question, the most important part, which we didn't notice in other parts of Africa or the world, is the issue of trust between citizens and their governments or leadership. When the government of Rwanda came out and the first case of COVID-19 was announced in the country in March, the country decided to go into a kind of a semi-lockdown situation at that particular moment. And the citizens complied. That trust between citizens and the government was critical. In terms of PPEs, handing out of masks to people, ensuring that the most vulnerable, the corporations came in and made sure that those who live in a subsistence way, hand to mouth, they have food. Mm-hmm. Trusting your government to take care of you during those times. Okay. I think that was critical, but also the government didn't wait for the cases to spike, so it went ahead of the curve. Mm-hmm. And there was a very proactive measure from the government led by the president, which started from actually as far back as December, when the first cases of COVID-19 started going global. And then the country, the Minister of Health, was fired at that particular moment because there were not enough COVID-19 testing equipment.
Let's go to Ghana. Odelia, the impact of COVID is undeniable, and Ghana is one of those countries that is reeling from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly when it comes to the import sector. I know they're very big on importing oil and cocoa, and the GNPC shortfalls are at 642 million Ghanaian cedis. And this begs the question, what is the magnitude of this sort of volatility on the markets? How is the GSC looking like?
I would say that in Ghana, the impact has been really devastating, especially when you put the benchmark oil price at $65 and then it went as low as $19 per barrel. When it comes to the markets, it's obvious that some of the things that investors would want to put their monies into in these volatile times is gold. And so you will find that a lot of investors on the GSC the GSC is largely made up of institutional investors and foreign investors. And so these foreign investors' first option is to quickly take a look at gold and as a store of value instead of keeping their money on the stock market. These were some of the things that happened that have happened in the past 6 to 7 months since we first recorded our COVID case in March 12th.
Great. Now let's go down to South Africa. Edwin, for a long time, March, April, May, there was a level 5 lockdown because the numbers were skyrocketing at a speed that nobody could fathom. But now these restrictions are being eased and South Africa is at level 1 lockdown. What impact did level 5 lockdown have on the economy, and is the easing of this lockdown slowly injecting life and vibrancy back into the South African economy?
Okay, yes. Level 5 lockdown had a devastating impact on the economy, just like, most of Africa, most of the world. I think you saw in South Africa, lots of companies closed down. At least 2 million people were said to have lost jobs. It forced government into a number of initiatives working in partnership with banks to support small businesses and to support individuals and try and keep them afloat so that when the easing of lockdown arrived, people were still able to, survive. I think it was a very strong bid to try and ensure that jobs were saved, etc. But I don't think, when you look at it right now, we're now in level 1. And as can be expected, some businesses have been recovering, but the recovery has been very patchy. In the mining and manufacturing, there's been recovery. There are encouraging signs of momentum in retail sales. But, the recovery in the new vehicle sales, for example, has stalled. There's no signs at this moment of a revival in tourism, hospitality, and related industries. Yes, the lifting of lockdown has helped to normalize some business activities, but many businesses, however, are grappling with tough financial situations as the damage to consumer income brought on by COVID has really depressed consumer spending. So, last night I was talking to a businessman and he told me that without a vaccine, the business sector in South Africa, probably Africa as well, is doomed, and many would go out of business, resulting in severe job losses and cost to economy. So to answer, there's recovery, but it's very slow and not having the impact as yet that we'd like to see.
Odelia, crossing over back to you, you'd earlier on mentioned about oil and the slump in prices where the benchmark was at $65, but COVID happened. Now, because of COVID-19, the stabilization fund fell to about 1 billion Ghanaian cedis. There is also a shortfall in the Ghana Heritage Fund at 453 million, shortfall in annual budget of about 3 billion Ghanaian cedis, shortfall in transfers to GNP at 642 million, and there's also an 11.4 national annual budget deficit. What does this mean for the citizens of Ghana?
So what it definitely means is that we will have to re-engineer ourselves as a country and quickly take a look at what really matters the most, and quickly be innovative and take a look at how we can as a country take a look at ourselves and see what exactly our prioritization should be. And if you take a look at the fact that we are going into an election in about 2 or 3 weeks, and that's on the 7th of December, then it's not a very palatable time for any government at all. And making hard decisions is exactly what is expected. Now, remember that we in election years will do a mini budget which just covers the first quarter of the next year. Now, the expectation was that government would have done something exciting in the first quarter budget, but nothing exciting actually happened, because it's time to really tighten up and really prioritize. The expectation also was that there could have been some increases in taxes for industries, for example, that had been doing well, like the telecoms industry, the mining sector, and also so that we could rake in some revenue from there to plug some of the holes. But that also was not done by the Ministry of Finance, because the expectation is that you also do not want to overburden these sectors, which already have some taxes currently in those two sectors that the various chamber, for example, the telecoms chamber has been battling issues relating to some taxes that were introduced recently that have been reduced. What they are asking for is that those taxes, for example, should totally even be scrapped. And then also when it comes to the oil, the mining sector, they have also been looking forward to some taxes also being scrapped totally. So these are not definitely the industries you would want to touch. And so government prioritization on basically the parts of the economy that can generate revenue in these times have been the concentration, and going and spending extravagantly for the elections is not a choice. So for government now, it's even helping, or it's very helpful, because we still do not have the opportunity to have large gatherings to really go on big budgeted campaigns and all that. And so spending for both sides will definitely be reduced.
Arnold, I understand in Rwanda, as much as they've been able to contain the COVID-19 pandemic, they're also reeling from the economic effect, because the global economy is a synergized chain where if one breaks, the other cannot function. Now, imports from China to Rwanda have decreased by over 23%. Now, for a country that is small as Rwanda, what does it mean for their growth and for the GDP when they cannot import the much needed goods that they need to keep the economy going, but they cannot also export because nobody is buying unless it's essential?
Rwanda's economy, unlike most East African Community member states, is not as intertwined with the global economy as many would expect. But nevertheless, you can't be an island in this thing. Rwanda's been growing at a rate of about double-digit figures over the past, say, 5-6 years. The last 5-6 years of the decade, 10%, 12%, 11.5% average growth there. This has been affected, but that growth was largely due to things like the construction sector and the services sector that the country has greatly paid attention to. Now, the service sector is one of those that has been most affected by COVID-19, being that Rwanda had positioned itself as a luxury tourism destination. Of course, that was affected. It's expected to pick up. When you look at the Q3 numbers that were released just last week by the Central Bank of Rwanda, you saw a bounce back there of the construction industry. Largely, and for a country, a young economy like Rwanda's, a budding economy that's just growing, you expect things like construction to pick up quickly there. But what has been affected majorly has been that inflation in the country. We've seen goods, the prices of goods, and that's basic goods. We're talking about beans. We're talking about posho ugali for you there in Kenya. These are pap for you, Edwin, as well. These are the foods that are largely dependent on the majority of the people. And we've seen an almost 400% increase. So inflation has gone up to almost double-digit figures. Hyperinflation, they are flirting with about 10%. And that is not really good news. And Rwanda has also been struggling heavily with the balance of payment position, being that it imports more than it exports. And that has increased widely. So economic growth is expected to be lower than normal, but it should be at about 3% by the end of the year, which is still in positives for the country. And there was the uptick of the Economy Recovery Fund, which is a $100 million fund that the government was able to provide for industries in the service sectors to enable them and the small and medium enterprises, which are the backbone of most of the economies on the continent, so that they are able to function as a result of the COVID-19, so that they can bounce back. There's been a very low uptake of this. I had a conversation with the governor earlier this week of the central bank, and saying they're going to change measures and the criteria around that to ensure that it goes to the most vulnerable of businesses.
Great. Now let's cross over to South Africa. As Arnold has mentioned, inflation in Rwanda has gone up, and also South Africa is reeling from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The first 2 months of 2020, about the rand shed about 11 percentage points, and it's been depreciating since then. Moody has downgraded South Africa's credit ratings. Now, bearing in mind this kind of financial scenario in a country and the fact that unemployment numbers are spiking by the day, what does this mean for the South African economy currently and any bid for economic revival?
Well, the question rightly alludes to the fact that the South African economy was in trouble before the pandemic. So, the pandemic just exposed the fault lines and laid it out bare for everyone to see. So, any recovery that's going to happen will have to take into account the past issues. And the pandemic hit when our economy was, damaged by years of inefficient public spending and a sharp contraction in private sector fixed investment. So this does not bode well for job creation prospects. So right now, restarting the economy to get it back to a firm growth level of around 3% a year will require what people say a big bang approach, which also includes skills development, ensuring that universities and technicons and colleges are all part of this. And, I think the key thing to remember is that the rand remains very vulnerable to both global and domestic shocks. So we're not out of the woods as yet.
Okay, we'll cross over back to you in a minute, but let me cross over to Odelia. I want to find out from you, looking at the Q3 numbers and Q2, and now that we're heading into Q4 and the 2021 new year, but there's also the election, which sort of creates a new twist to the equation. What needs to be done to put Ghana back to a recovery path or track?
One of the biggest, hardest hit sector has been the SME sector, startups, who perhaps were just beginning their journey, have totally going to be wiped out and all. The expectation is that we should be able to put in structures that sort of cushion such businesses. And so the steering committee, for example, has been put in place to quickly put together a startup bill and pass it quickly, so that for the first 8 years, it's expected that these startup companies will not pay taxes. And if also there are investors putting money into these startups from different economies, these investors will also have some level of rebate. So when it comes to the startup ecosystem, this is one of the things that government is expected to do by next year, 2021.
Okay.
Apart from that, we have also been having the infamous conversation of the Ejapa royalty deal, which is expected to sort of like sell our mineral resources ahead of time, so that we sort of like get revenue to be able to spend in the coming years. This has received a lot of backlash from CSOs, from the general public, and also it's expected that, well, government will have to take a real look at this particular deal. Otherwise, it looks like the backlash, both locally and internationally, hasn't been really good. But this was expected to be one of the biggest spending pots for the government. Now that it's receiving a lot of backlash, I am sure that then they will quickly have to regroup and take a look at where else.
Arnold, as we wind up just under 30 seconds, where should Rwanda put its money in terms of economic recovery?
SMEs, man. SMEs are the backbone of the economy. Small, medium enterprises where you need to put the money, make sure those survive because majority of our people live hand to mouth. So that's subsistence. And by our people, I mean sub-Saharan Africa. I think SMEs should get the lion's share of the funding. The criteria should be lowered for access to this funding and also reskilling young people because the jobs of the future, which we used to talk about 4 or 5 years ago, are the jobs of now. Or COVID-19 accelerated the digitization. Those people need to get those skills, and the people most vulnerable without those skill sets are the young people going by our education systems that seem to be out of touch.
Finally, the service sector and the industry contribute a total of about 80% to the South African GDP. You recently did an article where you said the service industry and particularly hospitality will be the gateway to revival. Please explain. 30 seconds.
Well, I suppose if you Well, for the past decade, the tourism sector has been one of the best performing sectors of the economy here at home and the world over. With the outbreak of pandemic, from being on a high, it went to such a low that it resulted in people, businesses closing down, jobs being lost, etc. So government sees domestic tourism, then regional tourism and international as a solution to try and bring back revenue into the economy. But I think it's going to require a lot more collaborative partnership approach if we hope to rebuild the sector. I think, tourism should not be viewed in isolation, but rather a global phased-in approach with industries across South Africa. Because, all the challenges, like all the economy, or given the challenges all are experiencing, a multi-focused industry turnaround can be embarked upon, but we need to achieve economies of scale, to leverage opportunities, and also ensure that you don't make costly mistakes that will add to the economic woes, but rather use it to build and harness for better, build on the hope, I would say, right, for now.
Great. Thank you very much, Edwin, for making time. Odelia, thank you for making time. And Arnold, it was a pleasure having you on the show.
Pleasure. Good to be there.
Great. We take a short breather. When we come back, Vincent Odhiambo will be taking you through Social Watch, but still the Pan-African edition. Keep it Metropole TV.